Kenya's President William Ruto had met Abdullahi in Hargeisa to announce that Somaliland would be opening a liaison office in Nairobi, implying that this video is brought to you by Ground News. Somalia doesn't have a great reputation. It's one of the poorest and most violent countries in the world, and it's been in a state of crisis since the collapse of Siad Barre's authoritarian regime in 1991. However, tucked away in Somalia's northwest, there's actually a functioning democratic state called Somaliland, which has been de facto independent for 34 years, but is yet to be recognised by any UN member state. When Trump was elected last year, there were a flurry of reports that he was considering recognising Somaliland, and while these rumours died down once he took office, they've suddenly reignited, with Somaliland's president telling The Guardian last week that, quote, recognition is on the horizon, and Kenya, one of the most powerful countries in the region, affording tacit recognition by allowing Somaliland to open a liaison office in Nairobi. So in this video, we're going to have another look at Somaliland's long struggle for independence, and whether it could soon become the world's newest country. Could you rank every single politician in the world? Hear our thoughts and argue with us on our podcast, The World Leader Leaderboard. Find it over on the TLDR Podcast YouTube channel or in your favourite podcast app. So let's start with a bit of context. We've actually done a couple of videos on Somaliland before, so go and watch that if you want to know more. But the TLDR is that modern-day Somalia used to be split into two colonial territories, Italian Somaliland in the east and British Somaliland in the northwest. In 1960, British Somaliland became the independent country of Somaliland, to be recognised by 35 other UN members. 5 days later, though, Italy gave up Italian Somaliland, and the two immediately united to become the Somali Republic, which is what we now call Somalia. In retrospect, this was probably a mistake from Somaliland's perspective. Italian Somaliland had a population roughly 3 times that of British Somaliland, and the north was often overlooked by the south. Somalia's first constitution, for example, only passed in 1961 because it had overwhelming support in the south. Somaliland got its chance for autonomy in 1991, when Somali dictator Siad Barre was overthrown by anti-government rebels, including the Somali National Movement. The Somali National Movement were a northern paramilitary group, and after ousting Barre, they decided to declare Somaliland's independence, with basically the same borders as the British Protectorate of Somaliland. In 2001, they held a referendum on independence, which was supported by 97% of Somaliland citizens. Since then, Somaliland has essentially been an autonomous state, and a beacon of stability in a region otherwise beset by chaos. They've held multiple peaceful elections, and in 2017, Freedom House ranked Somaliland as the only free country in East Africa. The country is very poor, but they've got their own government, currency, the Somaliland shilling, passports, police force, license plates, and even a consulate in Washington. Despite this, Somaliland hasn't been explicitly recognised by any other country, in large part because most of the international community worries that recognising Somaliland's statehood would encourage other nearby separatist movements. Nonetheless, a handful of countries have indirect relations with Somaliland, and there were even rumours late last year that Donald Trump was considering formal recognition. This is actually an idea that comes from Project 2025, the infamous right-wing manifesto drawn up by the Heritage Foundation that's apparently popular with Trump's team, which recommends, quote, the recognition of Somaliland statehood as a hedge against the US's deteriorating position in Djibouti. For context, the US, like lots of other countries, has a military base in Djibouti, but American policymakers are concerned about China's growing influence, and Trump could build a second base in Berbera to bolster America's position. Anyway, these rumours sort of died down earlier this year, but they restarted last week when Somaliland's president Abdirahman Mohamed Abdullahi gave an interview with The Guardian, claiming that, as part of an ongoing recognition process, Trump's ambassador to Somalia had visited him 3 times in the past year, and that America's most senior military official in East Africa had recently visited Hargeisa, Somaliland's capital. Only a day earlier, Kenya's President William Ruto had met Abdullahi in Hargeisa to announce that Somaliland would be opening a liaison office in Nairobi, implying that Ruto thinks Somaliland's recognition is at least on the cards. This also comes a couple of weeks after former UK Defence Secretary Gavin Williamson, who's long been an ardent advocate of Somaliland statehood, told The Guardian that US officials had told him they were on the cusp of recognition. So why have these rumours suddenly restarted? Well, we see at least two possible reasons America might be interested in Somaliland again. First, the US's recent struggles in the Red Sea. For context, last month, after a month-long bombing campaign by US forces, Trump suddenly announced he'd negotiated a ceasefire with the Houthis, who'd been attacking commercial ships transitioning through the Red Sea. This was a bit of a surprise, given the Houthis have proved relatively immune to bombing campaigns in the past. But according to a piece published by the New York Times, it wasn't that the US bombed the Houthis into submission. On the contrary, the bombing campaign was so costly and ineffective that Trump just decided he'd had enough, and the only way he could get the Houthis to agree to end their attacks on commercial traffic was by telling them that they were still free to continue attacking Israel or Israeli ships. America's apparent inability to project power in the Red Sea and Middle East more generally might be a motivating anxiety behind any renewed interest in Somaliland, given a base in Berbera would expand America's military footprint in the region. But the second possible reason is Palestine. As you might already know, Trump's preferred so-called peace plan for Gaza involves expelling millions of Palestinians out of Gaza while the US redevelops the Strip. Originally, Trump and Netanyahu proposed sending these displaced Palestinians to neighbouring Arab states, but this went down about as well as you'd expect. However, Somaliland has apparently pitched itself as a potential refuge for displaced Palestinians. President Abdullahi was recently quoted as saying, "We are a hospitable people. The Palestinians are our brothers. If they decide to come on their own, we don't mind." And the deputy director of Somaliland's refugee department told The Guardian, quote, "Palestinians have been moving here for a long time, since 2004-2005. Somaliland welcomes all refugees." Now, to be clear, we're definitely not endorsing Trump's peace plan, and the idea that Somaliland, an internationally unrecognised state with a GDP per capita of about $1,000, has the capacity to accommodate a meaningful number of Palestinian refugees seems somewhat implausible to us. Nonetheless, you can see why it'd be an attractive idea for Trump, who's not one to let reality get in the way of a policy. If you want to know more about this topic,